A fundamental question about power in America is coming to a head, one that reaches far beyond the marble halls of Washington and into the daily lives of millions of Americans. This is not just another political squabble, it's a high-stakes legal battle, a final showdown that could reshape the very foundation of how our government works. The outcome will ripple through every port, every grocery aisle, and every small business ledger. It's a fight that determines how much you pay for everyday goods, whether your job is secure, and how stable our economy remains in turbulent times. At its core, the question is simple but profound. Who truly holds the authority to tax imported products? Is it Congress, the body elected to represent the people's will, or the president, acting swiftly in the name of national security during emergencies? The Trump administration's sweeping tariffs on goods from over 90 nations, justified as a shield against what it called unfair foreign competition, sparked a constitutional crisis that has divided lawmakers, business leaders, and legal scholars alike. Now, the Supreme Court stands at the center of this storm, tasked with a decision that could redefine the balance of power between the branches of government for generations to come. The justices could reaffirm Congress's traditional constitutional role in setting taxes and trade policy, preserving the system of checks and balances that has guided the nation for centuries. Or, they could grant the presidency vast new authority to act unilaterally on trade, setting a precedent that would expand executive power in ways never before seen. For every family trying to stretch a paycheck, every entrepreneur struggling to keep the lights on, and every investor watching the markets, the stakes could not be higher. The decision will shape the economic landscape for years to come. This is more than a policy dispute. It's a defining test of the American system of checks and balances, and the outcome will echo in every pocket across the nation. The U.S. Constitution deliberately gives Congress, not the president, the power to tax and regulate foreign commerce. This foundational principle was designed to ensure that decisions about the nation's economy would be made by representatives of the people, not by a single executive. By placing these powers in the hands of Congress, the framers sought to prevent any one branch from wielding too much influence over the country's financial destiny. For nearly 2 centuries, this division was clear. Congress debated and set tariffs, often after lengthy and passionate arguments. These debates allowed for public input, compromise, and transparency, reflecting the will of the people and the diverse interests of the nation. The legislative process was sometimes slow, but it was intentionally so to ensure careful consideration of economic policy. The president's role was to execute laws and handle diplomacy, not to set economic policy by decree. The executive branch was expected to enforce the laws passed by Congress, acting as a check rather than a rival to legislative authority. This balance was seen as essential to the health of the republic. Over time, however, Congress delegated some emergency powers to the president, especially during times of war or national crisis. These powers were intended to be used sparingly, for rare and specific emergencies when swift action was needed, not as a tool for broad economic policy or routine governance. Now, critics argue the president has stretched this emergency authority far beyond its original intent, bypassing the democratic process and undermining the careful balance of power. They warn that such actions threaten the very system of checks and balances that has defined American government for generations. If any economic challenge can be declared a national emergency, the president could impose taxes or tariffs unilaterally without meaningful oversight or debate. This raises profound questions about the limits of executive power and the future of democratic accountability. This is the constitutional tug-of-war now before the Supreme Court, historical precedent and the original intent of the framers versus claims of modern necessity and executive flexibility. The justices must weigh the lessons of the past against the demands of the present. The outcome will determine whether the separation of powers endures as a living principle or erodes under the weight of expanding executive authority. The decision will echo through every branch of government and every corner of American life. The stakes could not be higher. The very foundation of American democracy hangs in the balance, as the nation awaits a verdict that will shape its future. At the center of this storm is the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEPA, passed in 1977. Born out of a turbulent era marked by global uncertainty, the law was crafted to give the president a powerful but focused tool to respond to extraordinary threats from abroad. It was a time when lawmakers worried about sudden crises, hostage situations, rogue regimes, and the growing reach of international terrorism. IEPA was designed for targeted action against specific foreign threats, like sanctioning rogue states or freezing terrorist assets. The idea was to act quickly and decisively, but always with a clear and limited purpose. For years it was used to block the assets of foreign adversaries, disrupt funding for terrorism, and respond to emergencies that threatened national security. For decades, presidents used it surgically, not to set broad economic policy. The law was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer, meant for precise interventions, not sweeping changes to the nation's economy. But in recent years, the Trump administration redefined national emergency to include global trade competition, a dramatic break from precedent. Suddenly the law was being used in ways its original authors never imagined, expanding its reach far beyond its initial intent. This allowed the president to bypass Congress and impose sweeping tariffs, treating trade with allies and rivals alike as an emergency. The move blurred the line between foreign threats and economic competition, raising questions about the true limits of executive power. Critics warn this interpretation stretches IEPA beyond recognition, letting the president legislate from the White House. They argue that such broad authority undermines the checks and balances at the heart of American democracy and could set a dangerous precedent for future leaders. If trade competition is an emergency, almost any issue could be. The definition of emergency itself becomes elastic, potentially opening the door to executive overreach on a scale never seen before. This legal challenge is about whether IEPA can be used to reshape domestic economic policy without Congress. The courts must now decide if the president's power under IEPA has a clear boundary, or if it can be stretched to fit the needs of any administration. The answer will determine the limits of presidential power and set the tone for how America responds to future crises, real or perceived. The stakes are high. At risk is the future of American economic governance, the balance of power between Congress and the president, and the very definition of what constitutes a national emergency in the modern era. Supporters of the president's actions argue that Congress is too slow to respond to fast-moving global threats. They say only the president can act quickly enough to protect American industries and jobs from unfair foreign practices. Tariffs, they claim, are a powerful negotiating tool, forcing other countries to the table and defending U.S. interests. The billions in tariff revenue, they argue, help fund government priorities without raising domestic taxes. In their view, the president must have the flexibility to use every tool, including emergency powers, to shield American workers. The old ways, they insist, can't keep up with 21st century challenges. For them, decisive executive action is essential for national security and economic survival. Opponents warn that letting the president define emergencies and impose taxes undermines the Constitution's checks and balances. They argue the framers gave Congress the power to tax to prevent a single leader from ruling by decree. Declaring a general economic issue a national emergency, they say, is a dangerous subversion of democracy. The legislative process, though slow, ensures all voices are heard and major policies are carefully considered. Acting unilaterally risks unforeseen economic harm and silences diverse perspectives. The issue isn't toughness on trade, it's how decisions are made and who makes them. Upholding the separation of powers, they insist, is more important than any short-term policy win. The real danger is weakening the democratic institutions meant to protect the nation. The tariff policy's impact is felt far beyond Washington. American businesses relying on imports face soaring costs, forcing tough choices, absorb losses or raise prices. Small and mid-sized companies, lacking resources to adapt, have delayed investments and laid off workers. The uncertainty from ongoing legal battles paralyzes long-term planning. For families, higher business costs mean higher prices on everyday goods, from appliances to groceries. Economists call tariffs a hidden tax, hitting lower and middle-income households hardest. Promised benefits like new jobs and investment haven't offset these rising costs. In 2025 alone, customs duties soared by $18 billion, a massive cost to the economy. If the Supreme Court strikes down the tariffs, over $100 billion could be refunded to importers, potentially boosting the economy. For now, the financial burden remains a stark reminder of this power struggle's real-world stakes. The legal fight began with small businesses hit hardest by the tariffs. In May 2025, a coalition led by Voss Selections sued, arguing the president misused IEPA and only Congress can levy such taxes. The Court of International Trade sided with them, ruling IEPA can't cover general trade disputes. The administration appealed, keeping tariffs in place as the case moved up. The Federal Circuit Court's judges expressed deep skepticism about the administration's broad definition of emergency. Sensing another likely defeat, the White House prepared to take the case to the Supreme Court. Now, the nation's highest court will decide, does the president have this sweeping power, or does it belong to Congress? The administration warns a loss would hurt the economy. Challengers say a win would threaten democracy. The stage is set for a historic Supreme Court decision in early 2026. The Supreme Court's decision will set America on one of two paths. A win for the administration shifts power to the president, letting future leaders impose tariffs and reshape trade by declaring emergencies. Critics warn this would erode checks and balances, creating an imperial presidency. Supporters say it gives government the speed and flexibility needed in a fast-changing world. A win for the challengers reaffirms Congress's authority, restores the separation of powers, and could refund billions to businesses. It would force the executive to work with Congress on trade policy, strengthening democracy. As the nation waits, the very character of American governance hangs in the balance. The court's ruling will define the boundaries of power for generations to come.